The grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious five-star hotel glowed beneath magnificent crystal chandeliers as hundreds of distinguished guests gathered for an exclusive charity gala celebrating the 25th anniversary of one of the nation's most successful technology companies. Influential investors, senior executives, celebrities, respected entrepreneurs, and government officials filled the elegant venue, exchanging confident smiles and business conversations while a live orchestra played softly in the background. Every corner reflected wealth and sophistication, from the polished marble floors and golden decorations to the beautifully arranged tables dressed with fresh flowers and fine crystal. Luxury vehicles continued arriving outside as photographers welcomed prominent guests onto the red carpet, capturing every glamorous entrance. Amid the excitement, a black sedan quietly stopped near the hotel's main entrance. Daniel Carter stepped out first before opening the passenger door for his 9-year-old daughter, Emma. She looked up at him with a cheerful smile as he gently adjusted the ribbon in her hair and brushed a wrinkle from her dress. Daniel wore a clean navy blue suit that appeared modest compared to the designer outfits surrounding him, but he paid little attention to appearances. Earlier that evening, he had proudly attended Emma's school recognition ceremony, choosing to spend that important moment by her side instead of preparing for an extravagant event. Holding her hand, he walked confidently through the hotel's entrance without seeking attention. Inside the ballroom, several guests briefly glanced at the father and daughter before returning to their conversations, quietly assuming they were invited by someone else. Daniel acknowledged the reception staff with a warm smile, and the event coordinator carefully checked his invitation. The moment she read his name, her professional expression changed into one of immediate respect. She welcomed him warmly and personally escorted Daniel and Emma through the crowded ballroom toward an exclusive table positioned directly in front of the stage, a section reserved only for company owners, board members, and major investors. Just as Daniel reached for his chair, an elegantly dressed wealthy woman from the neighboring table slowly rose to her feet. After giving him a long, judgmental look from head to toe, she folded her arms and spoke in a cold voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "I think you're sitting in the wrong place." Instantly, nearby conversations faded, music seemed to disappear beneath the silence, and dozens of curious faces turned toward the single father and his young daughter, unaware that the next few minutes would leave the entire ballroom speechless. The woman's voice carried across the ballroom with enough force to draw the attention of nearly everyone seated nearby. A confident smile spread across her face as she stepped closer to Daniel, clearly convinced she was correcting an embarrassing mistake. "This section isn't open to everyone," she said, pointing toward the reserved table. "It's for company owners, board members, and major investors. There are plenty of other seats available." Daniel remained calm, keeping one reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. Before he could respond, the woman turned toward an event coordinator and demanded, "Please verify his invitation again. Someone obviously made an error." The coordinator hesitated, explaining that Daniel's invitation had already been scanned and approved at the entrance, but the woman refused to accept the explanation. "Scan it again," she insisted. "People don't simply walk into a VIP section dressed like that." Her remark triggered quiet whispers throughout the ballroom as several guests exchanged knowing looks and began making their own assumptions. Emma tightened her grip on her father's hand, sensing the uncomfortable atmosphere even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. Looking up at Daniel, she whispered softly, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" Daniel smiled gently and shook his head, telling her everything was fine. Moments later, the woman's husband, the company's chief executive officer, noticed the growing commotion and walked over with several senior executives following behind him. After listening only to his wife's version of events, he looked directly at Daniel and said in a polite but dismissive tone, "Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding, our staff will gladly help you find another table." Without raising his voice or showing frustration, Daniel calmly replied, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm sitting exactly where my invitation instructed me to sit." His quiet confidence only deepened the tension. The CEO frowned, the wealthy woman folded her arms with satisfaction, and every nearby guest waited to see whether security would be called to remove the modestly dressed single father from the most exclusive table in the room. Daniel never raised his voice or showed the slightest sign of anger. While the whispers around the ballroom grew louder, he remained seated with the same calm expression that had been on his face since he arrived. He gently squeezed Emma's hand, silently assuring her that everything would be all right. Years of overcoming life's hardships had taught him that reacting emotionally rarely solved anything. Instead of arguing with the wealthy woman or defending himself, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed his invitation to the event coordinator without a word. She carefully examined it once again, scanned the barcode a second time, and looked at the screen with growing confusion. Everything matched perfectly. The invitation was authentic, the registration was valid, and the assigned seat was exactly where Daniel was sitting. Unsure of what to do next, she quietly informed the CEO that there was no problem with the guest's credentials. The wealthy woman immediately dismissed the explanation with an impatient wave of her hand. "That can't be right," she said confidently. "Check the system again." Someone must have entered the wrong information. Another staff member reviewed the guest list while a third verified the reservation records, but every result pointed to the same conclusion. Daniel Carter had every right to be there. Even so, the woman refused to believe it. She glanced at Daniel's modest suit and then at Emma's simple dress before saying loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Important investors don't arrive looking like they just came from a school meeting." A few people laughed quietly, while others simply watched in uncomfortable silence. Daniel ignored every insulting comment. Instead, he turned toward Emma and smiled warmly. "Never judge yourself by what strangers think," he said softly. "The people who truly matter will always judge your character before your appearance." His words carried no bitterness, only quiet wisdom. Those standing nearby expected him to lose his temper or walk away in embarrassment, but his composure had the opposite effect. The longer he remained calm, the more uncomfortable the crowd became, while the confidence of the wealthy woman slowly began to look less like certainty and more like arrogance. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the grand entrance doors opened once again. The conversations that had filled the ballroom suddenly faded as everyone turned toward the entrance. Walking inside was the company's board chairman, accompanied by several directors and senior advisors. His arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Executives straightened their jackets, investors stood from their seats, and employees respectfully stepped aside to clear a path. The CEO quickly walked forward with a welcoming smile, expecting to greet the chairman first as he always did during important company events. However, something completely unexpected happened. Without slowing his pace or acknowledging the executives waiting to receive him, the chairman walked directly past the CEO and continued toward the center of the ballroom. Every pair of eyes followed him in confusion. He stopped beside Daniel Carter, whose calm expression had never changed throughout the entire confrontation. A warm smile appeared on the chairman's face as he extended his hand. "Daniel," he said sincerely, "I'm so glad you could make it. I was beginning to wonder if traffic had delayed you." Daniel stood and shook his hand with genuine respect. "I'm sorry I'm a little late," he replied. "Emma had an important ceremony at school today and I wasn't going to miss it." The chairman smiled at the young girl. "Congratulations, Emma. Your father talks about you every chance he gets." Emma thanked him shyly, still unaware why everyone in the room suddenly looked so shocked. The CEO remained frozen only a few steps away, unable to understand why the chairman was treating the modestly dressed single father like one of his oldest and most respected colleagues. The wealthy woman who had questioned Daniel's presence only moments earlier slowly lowered her folded arms as uncertainty replaced her confidence. Around the ballroom, whispers spread from table to table. Guests who had laughed at Daniel just minutes earlier exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had completely misunderstood the man standing before them. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence became so overwhelming that the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the chairman to explain who Daniel Carter really was. The chairman slowly turned toward the audience, his expression composed as he looked across the silent ballroom. Sensing the confusion on every face, he decided there was no reason to delay the truth any longer. Placing a respectful hand on Daniel's shoulder, he smiled proudly before addressing the guests through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "allow me to introduce someone many of you have never had the opportunity to meet in person. This is Mr. Daniel Carter, one of the original visionaries behind this company and the man who currently owns 70% of its shares." For a brief moment, complete silence filled the room. It was as if every conversation, every breath, and every thought had come to a sudden stop. Then the shocking announcement spread through the crowd like a wave. Guests stared at Daniel with disbelief, struggling to connect the humble single father they had just watched being humiliated with the company's majority owner. The CEO's confident expression disappeared instantly, replaced by visible shock. His face lost its color as he slowly turned toward his wife, Realizing the enormous mistake that had unfolded in front of hundreds of influential people, the wealthy woman's eyes widened and her confident posture collapsed as the reality of her actions finally reached her. Only minutes earlier, she had questioned whether Daniel belonged in the room. Now she understood that the event itself existed largely because of his leadership and investment. The executives standing nearby exchanged uneasy glances, remembering every careless assumption they had silently accepted without asking a single question. Even the hotel staff looked stunned, realizing they had witnessed a moment that would likely become part of the company's history. Throughout the overwhelming reaction, Daniel remained exactly as he had been from the beginning, calm, respectful, and completely unaffected by the attention surrounding him. He showed no satisfaction at proving anyone wrong, no desire to embarrass those who had judged him, and no trace of arrogance. His quiet dignity spoke louder than the chairman's announcement, reminding everyone in the ballroom that true greatness never depends on expensive clothing, public recognition, or the need to impress others. As the stunned audience struggled to process the revelation, the chairman continued speaking, knowing many people were silently asking the same question: why would a man with such extraordinary wealth choose to live so simply? Looking around the ballroom, he smiled respectfully before explaining that Daniel had never been interested in luxury or public recognition. Years earlier, when the company was little more than an ambitious idea, Daniel had invested not only his money but also countless hours helping build it from the ground up. While others focused on titles and prestige, he concentrated on creating opportunities for talented people and ensuring the business would stand on a strong ethical foundation. After the unexpected passing of his wife, however, Daniel made a life-changing decision. He gradually stepped away from public events, board meetings, and media interviews so he could devote himself to raising his young daughter. Every important choice he made afterward revolved around Emma's happiness rather than expanding his personal fame. He rarely attended corporate celebrations, avoided interviews, and refused invitations that took time away from his family. Because of his long absence, many newer executives had never seen him in person, knowing his name only through confidential shareholder reports. The chairman explained that Daniel preferred driving an ordinary car, wearing comfortable clothing, and living in a quiet neighborhood because those choices reminded him of the values that had shaped his success. Wealth had changed his financial circumstances, but it had never changed his character. He believed genuine respect should be earned through honesty, compassion, and integrity instead of expensive possessions or social status. Listening to those words, several guests lowered their heads in embarrassment. They realized they had judged an individual entirely by his appearance, without making the slightest effort to understand who he truly was. Daniel glanced at Emma, who smiled proudly at her father without caring about company shares or business influence. To her, he wasn't a powerful investor or a respected founder. He was simply the loving father who never missed a school event, always kept his promises, and taught her that kindness was far more valuable than the image people tried so hard to project. The chairman stepped back from the microphone, expecting Daniel to address the room. Every eye remained fixed on the man who had just been revealed as the company's majority owner. Instead of expressing anger or demanding immediate consequences, Daniel walked forward with quiet confidence and looked around the ballroom. His gaze moved from the executives to the employees, then finally rested on the wealthy woman and the CEO. The silence was so complete that even the soft music had stopped. After a brief pause, Daniel spoke in a calm, measured voice. "I'd like to ask everyone a simple question," he said. "If I had been an ordinary guest with no ownership in this company, would the way I was treated tonight have been acceptable?" No one answered. Several executives lowered their eyes while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The question required no explanation because everyone already knew the answer. Daniel continued, explaining that the greatest measure of a person's character was not how they treated successful people, but how they treated someone they believed had no influence or authority. He admitted that he wasn't disappointed by being mistaken for an average guest. What troubled him was seeing how quickly assumptions had replaced courtesy and how easily respect disappeared when appearances failed to meet expectations. Looking toward the company's leadership, he emphasized that a healthy organization could never be built on pride, prejudice, or social status. Every employee, customer, supplier, visitor, and stranger deserved the same dignity regardless of their clothing, occupation, or financial position. Daniel then announced that the evening would become a turning point rather than a scandal. He instructed the board to introduce new policies focused on professional conduct, equal treatment, and respectful communication at every level of the organization. Mandatory leadership training would be implemented, and future promotions would depend not only on performance, but also on integrity and the ability to treat others with fairness. As his words echoed through the ballroom, the audience understood they had witnessed something far more significant than a dramatic revelation. They had received a lesson that would shape the company's culture for years to come, proving that true leadership is demonstrated through wisdom, humility, and the courage to transform a painful moment into lasting positive change. When Daniel finished speaking, the atmosphere inside the ballroom felt completely different. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had been replaced by reflection and quiet regret. After several long seconds, the CEO slowly stepped forward and faced Daniel in front of every guest. His voice was steady but filled with genuine remorse as he admitted that he had failed as a leader by accepting assumptions instead of seeking the truth. He publicly apologized for allowing appearances to influence his judgment and accepted full responsibility for what had happened. Without making excuses or shifting blame, he acknowledged that leadership required fairness, patience, and the willingness to listen before reaching conclusions. Standing beside him, his wife struggled to hold back tears. The confidence she had displayed earlier had completely disappeared. Looking directly at Daniel and then at Emma, she offered a heartfelt apology, admitting that she had allowed wealth and social status to shape the way she viewed other people. She confessed that the evening had exposed flaws in her own character that she had never recognized before. Daniel accepted both apologies with quiet dignity, making it clear that forgiveness did not erase the need for meaningful change. Rather than humiliating anyone or demanding resignations, he encouraged the board to focus on rebuilding a culture where respect became a daily practice instead of an empty slogan. Within days, the company announced a series of reforms inspired by the lessons of that unforgettable evening. Every employee, from senior executives to newly hired staff, would participate in professional ethics and leadership programs designed to eliminate discrimination and encourage empathy in the workplace. Clear procedures were introduced to ensure that concerns would always be investigated before action was taken, preventing personal bias from influencing important decisions. Managers would also be evaluated on how they treated colleagues, clients, and visitors, not solely on financial performance. News of the incident quickly spread throughout the business community, but instead of damaging the company's reputation, many people praised its willingness to confront mistakes openly and implement lasting improvements. The painful experience became a powerful reminder that genuine success is measured not only by profits or influence, but by the values an organization chooses to uphold when no one expects accountability. As the gala drew to a close, guests quietly began leaving the ballroom, but the mood was nothing like it had been at the beginning of the evening. The excitement and pride that once filled the room had been replaced by thoughtful silence. Many people paused before walking out, taking one last look at Daniel, as if they had witnessed something far more valuable than a business event. Several employees approached him individually to express their gratitude, not because of his ownership in the company, but because his response had shown them the kind of leader they hoped to become. Daniel accepted every handshake with humility, never mentioning the humiliation he had experienced earlier. Instead, he thanked them for their honesty and encouraged them to build a workplace where every person felt respected from the moment they walked through the door. After saying goodbye to the chairman and members of the board, Daniel took Emma's hand and quietly made his way toward the hotel entrance. The cool evening breeze greeted them as they stepped outside beneath the city lights. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Emma looked up at her father with the innocent curiosity only a child could have and smiled softly. "Daddy," she asked, "why didn't you tell everyone who you were when they said those things about you?" Daniel looked down at her, his expression filled with warmth, before gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Because, sweetheart," he replied, "if someone only respects you after learning your title or your success, then their respect was never real in the first place. Kindness should be given freely, not earned through money or power." Emma thought about his words for a moment before wrapping her arms around him in a heartfelt hug. Daniel smiled, opened the car door for his daughter, and watched as she climbed inside. As they drove away from the hotel, the bright lights of the city faded into the distance, but the lesson from that unforgettable evening remained. True greatness is never revealed by expensive clothes, impressive positions, or public recognition. It is revealed by the quiet strength to remain humble, the courage to treat everyone with dignity, and the wisdom to choose compassion even when others choose judgment. Every person carries a story that cannot be understood by appearance alone, and that is why first impressions should never become final judgments. It is easy to admire someone after discovering their wealth, influence, or success, but true character is revealed by the way we treat people before we know anything about their background. Respect loses its meaning when it is reserved only for those with power, expensive clothing, or important titles. Genuine kindness asks for nothing in return and should be offered equally to strangers, employees, customers, neighbors, and friends alike. Daniel Carter never needed to prove his importance because he understood that dignity comes from integrity rather than public recognition. Even after being insulted in front of an entire ballroom, he chose patience over revenge, wisdom over anger, and forgiveness over humiliation. His response transformed a painful moment into an opportunity for growth, reminding everyone that the strongest leaders do not use authority to embarrass others, but to inspire meaningful change. The wealthy woman and the CEO also learned a lesson they would never forget. Their mistake was not simply failing to recognize the company's majority owner, it was allowing assumptions to replace fairness and letting appearance determine value. That single decision exposed how easily pride can cloud judgment and how quickly prejudice can damage trust. Fortunately, they accepted responsibility, acknowledged their errors, and committed themselves to becoming better people instead of defending their actions. Their willingness to change proved that mistakes do not define a person's future if they are followed by sincere accountability and lasting improvement. The events of that evening serve as a reminder that every conversation, every encounter, and every decision reflects the values we carry within us. The next person you meet could be wealthy or struggling, famous or unknown, powerful or ordinary, but none of those labels should determine the amount of respect they receive. A person's true worth cannot be measured by appearance, possessions, or social status. It is measured by honesty, compassion, humility, and the way they treat others when no reward is expected. In the end, success may earn admiration, but kindness earns something far more valuable, lasting respect that no amount of money can ever buy.